Hey, everybody. Today is Monday, and welcome to How to Win at Everything. We are short one guest, Dr. Catherine Sanderson, so we're still looking to get her on. But for the time being, let's open it up and let's take a look and see who we have in the building. So you can say hey to all of our, excuse me, to all of our esteemed audience members. So good evening, everyone. Right. And obviously, you want to give our guests just a few moments here. I haven't heard words, so hopefully everything is all good here. But we're waiting for Dr. Sanderson to hop on with us. So, anyone who wants to jump in, let's talk shop. Oh, hey, Brenda. Get Brenda from Detroit hopping in. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Um, While we're waiting on Dr. Sanderson, if anyone has comments, questions, or anything, let's jump right in because dead air is probably the worst thing. Hey, Lori. Hey, thanks so much. Good to see you. Thanks so much for visiting with us. Um, yep, don't nothing yet. So, tell me, guys, what's going on? Because I don't know how Gabe Leo does this like on a nightly basis, where he just talks to people. Because near as I can tell, there is just a screen in front of me. So, you guys, let me know what's happening, and then let's chat it up about that. Otherwise, we'll have to start doing drinking games, and it's gonna get bad. Hey, Cecilia, thank you so much. Oh man, we got everybody jumping in. My good friend Emily Harmon jumping in. Hey, guys, good so much, so good to see everybody. Until we get our esteemed guests in, it looks like what we're gonna do is talk shop. Yes, yes, Brenda, you're saying the right things. And because it's your pro tip, I'm gonna throw it up there, so I don't want to take credit for it. So yes, let's talk about my day. Oh, wait a minute. I think. Oh yeah, we just got Catherine. Oh, okay. So guys, hold on one second. I'm gonna play us in with my cheesy intro, and then I'm gonna bring Catherine in.
Have you ever wondered why you struggle to find success or fulfillment or lasting happiness? It's probably because your default wiring is set to lose. The How to Win at Everything podcast looks at real people who have struggled with the same insecurities, fears, doubts, and expectations and found a way to succeed. Why? Their brains are rewired for success. We dive into their thought patterns to show you how to rewire your own brain to win at everything.
All right. So yes, I can hear you. Hey, Catherine, how's it going?
Good. I've just been sitting, waiting to be let into the meeting in Microsoft
No.
Teams. So apologize. I've been like waiting, and it's like when the meeting starts, we'll let people. And I'm like, good. And then I was like, I wonder if I did something wrong. So anyway, super apologies.
No.
The way it automatically saved on my Google Calendar. So anyway,
Oh, gotcha. Well, look, no worries. What I heard is that when you're a decent enough person, we will wait, and I was definitely happy too. And you just saved me. I don't know if you just saw the comment there. Brenda Miller is like, "Hey, just tell us about your day," and that was going to be so boring. People were
oh,
going to start dropping off. It was going to be bad. Thanks, Brenda. So, welcome, Catherine. For anyone who doesn't know, even though you guys should all know, because I'm guessing you're RSVP, this is Catherine Sanderson. She is Dr. Catherine Sanderson. She is the author of several of my favorite books, um, Positive Psychology, and the newer one. Give me the name
why
for it,
we act?
Catherine.
Why we
Why
act?
we act. I'm always remembering the moral bystanders, and uh, s- so so before we jump into me just flooding you with questions, tell us a little bit about yourself, and we will start from there.
Well, so let's see. I'm a professor. I mean, that's like my, day job with health insurance or whatever. But I will say what my passion is for, and Kelly, why I've been so looking forward to this opportunity for you and I to connect more,
Yes.
is that what I love is psychology and sharing it with people. Because the reality is, of course, my teaching is wasted on the young. Um, you know what I mean, though, right?
I do. I
Like
do. Yeah.
on the test. Wait, do I have to know this? And
Right.
so, when you gave me the opportunity to talk, I was like, well, this is great because this is like people who actually are not going to ask me if this is on the test. They're just interested in learning about psychology. So anyway, that's a little introduction to me.
I want to kind of jump into why it was super important and super interesting to have you on. So can you tell us a little bit about? Um, I, I'm gonna put you on the spot first. I'm gonna say that you're an expert in the field of positive psychology. What are you gonna say to that?
I mean, I will say that I write and talk and teach a lot about positive psychology. I'm going to be clear that what I'm doing is I'm describing other people's research. So
Hmm.
people often are like, well, when this study, and I'm seeing Lori is asking, it'll be this.
Uh huh.
That's
Right.
why I like talking to adults, right? That's why
Right.
I like talking to adults because they're just like, I'm here because I want to learn. So I will say I know a lot about positive psychology. I will say that, yes.
Okay. So this is our expert on positive psychology, right? So can you explain the field and explain why it's such a big thing?
Yeah, love that question. Thank you. So for years, and for those of you who took, intro to psych way back when, whatever, you probably remember that the field of psychology is all about like neuroses and depression and phobias and
Hmm.
problems, and right. I mean,
Hmm.
that's what I learned. That's
Hmm.
what so many people learn about psychology. And about 20 years ago or so now, there was a new movement within the field of psychology, which was the so called movement of positive psychology.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's hot now and it's new, but in reality, in the scheme of psychology, it's super new because
Hmm.
psychology focused on the bad. And it's a
Hmm.
wonderful new field because really what it focuses on is the happy, the good.
Right.
And that could be, feeling gratitude.
Yep.
That could be feeling love. It could be feeling
Hmm.
connection. And so it's actually a really wonderful, exciting new part of psychology, especially for people who, as somebody just noted, minored in psychology,
Uh-huh.
in psychology classes. But this is new. This is new. Unless you got like young people, really young people on this, this is newer than a lot of people, learned about when they learned about psychology.
Right. Now, my introduction to it, I was actually at work probably a couple years ago, and someone brought it up, and I was like, "Wait, I've never heard of this." Now, I've heard all about abnormal psychology, and I've heard all about all the negative things of psychology, and I was like, "Oh wow, this is uh, this is new. This is interesting." And I read probably 3 books before I got to yours, and there was something so natural and gratifying about having having your book, because it was, I mean, granted, yes, you're talking about other people's research and that sort of thing. Your breakdown was so human and so relatable that I immediately like fell into it, like, oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. I was like, this is awesome. So when I read the book, I was like, yeah, this is obviously what I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing. and and uh,
Oh,
and as a coach, we're choosing which way we kind of help people move forward, and there has been nothing better than helping people move forward and see these positive, like, upside sort of things. um, so can you tell us some of the tenets of positive psychology that may break from the norms of what we learned in our everyday working of like negative and abnormal psychology?
yes. Good question. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that many people go through the world sort of thinking like, wow, some people are happy, some people are not, or some people are
Hmm.
positive and some people are not, et cetera. And well, I'm not going to be happy if, I didn't have these things happen, if I'm not, wealthy, or if I'm not married, or if I'm not
Hmm.
whatever,
Hmm.
genetically blessed.
Right.
And what I like most, in all honesty, about the field of positive psychology is that I think it's very hopeful. that I think it's very hopeful. And Kelly, you were very nice, I think, and very, I'm going to say, diplomatic um, about describing my book, because here's the reality of my book. My book kind of talks about how I'm a mess. So the book, it does, though. You know what I mean. The book talks about how I don't naturally and easily find happiness. And so
Mm-hmm.
what I like about the book is it's basically saying, if you don't naturally find the silver lining, if you don't naturally, if you, and hey, listen, I'm
Mm-hmm.
very good at finding the opposite of the silver lining.
Mm-hmm.
Very good
Mm-hmm.
at that, ruminating and being negative. And the book is very much about like, you can do something. And so
Yeah.
what I like about the field is that it's hopeful, that it's saying, yeah,
Yeah.
there are some
Yeah.
people who are sort of genetically blessed and that they naturally find that silver lining. And if you're one of those people, that's awesome. But this book is actually not for those people.
Right.
This book is kind of like, as I say to people, if that's you, you don't really need to read the book because you're already doing it. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
an affirmation of how great you are, but you don't need it. And the book
Right.
is really about helping people who don't naturally find that. And
That's right.
that's what I have loved about it. That periodically, well, I mean, like you and I, Kelly, just are connecting. I had somebody like tweet about the book a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, I don't know the person, complete stranger. And I was like, that was my whole goal in writing it, was that people would
Mm-hmm.
pick up and be
Mm-hmm.
like, wait, I can do something. And, as I describe, we are all better off if there's more happiness in the world, right? We are all better off if I'm better
That
off,
is
if you're happy,
beautiful. Yeah.
right? We're all better
Yep.
off.
It feels like appropriate for the times also. Like I know why we act is probably even more appropriate for the times, but when I think about positive psychology and there's this sense of kind of like you said, like there's a sense of empowerment that comes with the idea that I can actually do some things to improve my level of happiness. I remember one of the things that I was most fascinated with was the myth of money, right? So can you talk a little bit about that? I think it's probably something that we're realizing more and more, but can you talk a little bit about the myth of money itself?
Yeah, that's really a great one. And that's one of the ones I think that we fall prey to the most. And that is
Hmm.
this idea that, well, if you have more money, then surely you would be happier. And so
Right.
therefore, what you got to do, you just got to get more money and more money and more money, and then you'll be happier. And, to me, that's one of the most important lessons, is that there's a wonderful expression, again, by someone else, that's called the hedonic treadmill. And the idea,
Hmm.
of course, is that you just keep walking and walking and you never reach your destination, because we can all think about times, younger, in which we're like, oh,
Hmm.
if
Yep.
somebody had given me $20, whoo, that would have been, really helpful. And then you get a raise and you're a little bit, have a little bit more money. And all of a sudden you're like, well, now if I just had a little bit more money like that person. And,
Yep.
and that's, I think, the challenge of this sort of comparison. And although you ask about the myth of money, and that's sort of a key, I think this myth about comparison can actually be about
Uh,
lots of different things, right? It can be like,
yep.
if I just looked like that, if I just lost 10 pounds, then I would
Yep.
be so happy. If I
That's
just,
right.
whatever, if I just bought a house, if I just got a promotion, if I just had my book get published,
Mhm.
whatever it is, if this thing happens, then I would be happy forever. And so all of those are myths that we're chasing,
Mhm.
and sort of having that recognition of, wait, that actually is not going to make me happy, is really important.
Oh, so I talked to a young lady today, and she said, "Hey, I am going to be the next Oprah," and honestly, just very successful young lady. And she's talking to me, and she's telling me all about these goals and dreams, and obviously these are all good things in and of themselves. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting was that there's this sort of constant sort of comparison to where someone else is, or what she should be, or what she could be. um, for those people who are those type A's, those people who are very driven, what should they be looking at, and where's the line? It's like it's obviously it's okay to reach out for things, but where's the line?
Yeah, so really important question. So I'd say a couple things. I'd say one, thinking about internal motivation versus external motivation. So sometimes people are saying like, well, I really want this. And then they don't really know why they want it, right? They
Hmm.
don't
Hmm.
really know why they want it. I had this interesting conversation about a month ago with a student of mine, and who was a very smart student, graduated maybe about 5 years ago. She asked me to write her a letter of recommendation to attend a doctoral program in psychology.
Mhm.
I said, I'm totally glad you're right, and I think you'd be a great candidate. And then I said, why do you want to get a doctorate
Mm.
in psychology? And she goes, well, I just really want to help people. And I said, well, do you know that like a doctorate is about like you're just going to do research? And she was like, no. And I was like, yeah,
Wow.
that's what you would be doing. I'm like, so if you like that, that's great. But if you wouldn't, then maybe you want to think about a master's in social work, or you want to think about becoming a therapist. You want to, different kind of thing. And she was like, oh
Mm.
yeah, that's what I want to do. And it was so interesting because her assumption was in order to do this thing, she needed this degree. She needed this
Wow.
degree. And again, PhD is a great program for some people who really, like doing research and getting into the nitty gritty of the science. For other
Right.
people, it's like hideous. And so I
Yeah.
think also really important to think about what's driving you. Are you motivated because you internally are like, this is going to be awesome? Or is it the, I want to be Oprah because I want to be famous, or I want
Mhm.
to be wealthy, or I want to be
Mhm.
whatever the woman who you spoke with today. And
Mhm.
so I think part of the real question is there can be internal drives.
Mhm.
It's different than if it's an external drive.
Okay, so now that's an interesting piece because a lot of us are going to assume that yes, I'm driven by my mission. But there can obviously be some other things involved. There can be some limiting beliefs. There can be some things from the past. Uh, how do you know which thing? And there may not be a short answer to this, but whatever you can give. How do you know where your drive, where your motivation is coming from?
Yeah, so I'm going to give it a really nerdy example of myself. I remember being in graduate school a long time ago, and I would be at a movie back when you used to like go to a movie theater and sit with people. But
Right. Right.
and I would be thinking, I can't wait for the movie to end so I can go home and write. And it was
Right.
like on a Saturday night. Like I was
Oh,
so
wow. Yep.
it was just like I loved that. I loved
Mhm.
it. It was super rewarding. And then I had friends who were just kind of like, this is a slog. Like this is kind of awful. And so I'm
Yeah.
giving that as an example. But again, I think there's lots of different things. So I will say, and he's not officially listening, but my husband is a lawyer. And if you ask him if he could do anything he wanted, he would be a basketball coach.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
women's high school basketball coach. I'm sorry,
Specific.
women's college basketball coach, to be very specific. And so there's an example in which, like, he's a lawyer. He does not want to be a lawyer.
Mhm.
He would very much like to be a women's basketball coach. And he's, fully aware of that. And so I think part of
Yeah.
it is sort of say, if you could get rid of the pressure and the society and the money and the whatever, what do you love?
Mhm. Mhm. Uh, so, um,
Kelly, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt for a second.
yes.
What do you love?
um, I love fixing things. I love bringing this sense of balance. I
Mhm.
love the idea of growing something. So this is for me kind of apparent in all the different parts of my life. Like I love gardening. I love I love fixing people. I love fixing people in the sense that I love having people air out what's going on and become like really conscious of themselves. I believe that that's enlightenment, and I am so internally attracted to that specific selfish high of getting to know that someone gets to know themselves.
And
So
that's what you're doing. And that's
yeah,
what you're doing, right? See, that's the thing is
yeah,
that's what you're doing. Like you're not doing it to be the next Oprah or whatever, or
sure,
whatever,
sure,
right? Like what you just described is you doing what you love, right?
yep, yep. Now, here's the thing that I do worry about though, because now I'm doing life coaching, and I'm going to call it loosely life coaching, but really it's all about um it's really more of a holistic coaching where we're talking about everything. So not just success, not just life. What I started off doing was business coaching. And I went into business coaching specifically because I went to Accenture and I said, "Hey, um, if you were going to help me start my business, what would I need to do?" And they'd say, "Well, you need to net at least $10 million a year." And I'm like, "Well, no, not quite there." And I saw that there is a niche available, there is a need there, and I went right into it because I saw money. And initially, yeah, I wanted to help people, and I actually did help small businesses. But the reality is that I had no idea that my love had nothing to do with money. Like I'm not very money driven. I keep my day job so that I can coach for free if I decide to, or I can charge whatever I want to without having to have the pressure of saying, I'm gonna charge you this much because I need to make rent, that sort of thing. So my worry is that when as people, how easy is it for us to identify what we love for real, and what's blocking us if there's such a thing.
Yeah. So I think sometimes what's blocking people is the voice from others around them, right? If
Uh,
I do this, what will my dad say? Or, or what will my spouse say? Or what will,
yep.
again, will that be kind of embarrassing? Or will that
Hmm.
be kind of, whatever, less prestigious or less, famous or whatever. So I
Yep.
think sometimes, that sort of voice is blocking us. And I think, trying to sort of separate, and this is something that I talk a lot about, not as a life coach, but I talk about it a lot
Hmm.
as an advisor with my students, is that people will come in and
Yep.
say, I really want to major in econ. And I'll be like, okay, great. Why? Because I want to make a lot of money. And I'll be like,
Right.
well, I mean, again, it's not, it's, and I will say that, time and time again, when I'm having conversations with students, what I'm trying to do is get them to figure out what they love. I
Yeah.
remember a student a few years ago who was pre-med, and she was doing horribly. Like, she was really doing horribly in all of
Mm-hmm.
her pre-med classes. And I said to her, I mean, we can get you a tutor, we can do this or that, but, do you really like these classes? And she was like, no.
Hmm.
And I was like, then why are you pre-med? And she goes, well, I want to be a doctor and I have to take these classes. And after kind of working with her for about a month and kind of getting to know her, I finally sat down and I said, listen, I'm like, we can do this and you can become a doctor. We can do it. I'm like, but here's the thing. There are a ton of different ways to help people, in that you could do without being a doctor. There are lots of
Sure.
different ways
Yep.
to help people, make a difference that are not that.
Yep.
And you might like some of them more and be better at it. And she didn't say anything, and she left my office, and I didn't hear from her about 2 days. And I sort of thought, oh, I've overstepped. And then she shows up outside my office one day and she looks at me and she goes, I'm going to be a history major. And she just had this like light and expression on her
I
face.
love it.
But it was an example of, being a doctor is a great thing. And I'm sure that there are lots of people who do it, and it makes them very happy.
Hmm. Hmm.
But if you're doing it because you're like, that's going to be my path to, being rich, that's, you only live once. And
Yep.
that's, this is not the dress rehearsal, right? This is like your life. And so to me, I think trying to separate, do I want this thing because I want it, or do I want it because other people around me or society wants it? And I think people vary to how much they can listen to different voices.
Now, I think that's really interesting because I used to work at a place that consolidated student loans, and I remember meeting a young lady. She had gone into a doctorate program. She had about maybe $200,000 in student loan debt, and she realized she didn't want to be a doctor. Um, and yeah, so she had no degree, $200,000 in debt, and uh, she was in a really bad place because she's saying, "Hey, I'm almost suicidal here because I have nowhere to go." And I always go back to that when I think about. I wish there was some way to have connected with her in a level where I could say, "Hey, let's get you some help as far as like finding out your path." So for me, it is very near and dear to my heart, and I do appreciate so much you kind of giving us a layout of what that looks like. So for everyone who's listening, watching, you guys, uh, Catherine has laid down some foundational pieces for us. Um, so now I want to move into something else is I want to say near and dear, which is this idea of, well, for me, it's all about human responsibility and that sort of thing. But for you, you wrote the book, Why We Act. And I want to, can you describe to us what you say the book is about?
So, as we've discussed so far, Kelly,
Hmm.
I have focused on positive psychology, and that's what I, teach and write about. And about 3 years ago, my oldest child started college. And in his first 2 weeks, he called me late one night and said, Mom, a student died in my dorm today.
Hmm.
And it was a story that even if you don't know, this college, this kid, whatever, it's a story you've heard.
Mhm.
He was drunk, he fell and hit his head, and his friends watched over him. They strapped a backpack to his shoulders to keep him from rolling onto his back and vomiting and choking to death. They checked to make sure he was still breathing. They put him in bed. But what they didn't do for 19 hours was call 911.
Wow.
And when they finally called, it was too late. The kid's family flew in from out of town. They were with him when the hospital disconnected him from life support. But when I heard that story, I was just, I was struck as a mom. I was struck as a professor,
Mhm. Mhm.
how many ways that could have gone differently. So that was actually the prompt for this book, Why We Act. Now, I've just told that story, and that story is very familiar. People hear about fraternity hazing and so on.
Yeah.
But, I wrote that, I started writing this book proposal. And then about a year after that, the Harvey Weinstein thing came out, where it was clear that many, many, many people had known what he was doing for a very
Mhm.
period of time. The grand jury report about the Catholic Church in Pennsylvania came out, suggesting that the Catholic Church had just sort of, passed people around.
Yeah.
The Olympic gymnastics doctor thing came out.
Uh,
And so when I talk about all those examples, here's the commonality. I believe that most people are good. But the problem is, if good people don't do anything in the face of bad behavior,
mhm.
then really bad things happen. And although the book is called Why We Act, this is what I wanted to call it, which I now, my publishers probably wishing they had just let me call it that so I wouldn't keep bringing it up. But the book, what I wanted to call the book, and I lost on, was The Appalling Silence of the Good People.
Mm.
Which is a famous, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. quote
Mhm.
about the silence of the good people. And so my book is basically about the silent good people. Why
Mhm.
are many, many people good and silent in lots of different situations? How do we understand the psychology of that? And then what can we use in terms of tools to step up and do something different, to become, as I described, turning people from a bystander into a moral rebel. So that's a long answer to what my most recent book is about.
So, for those who haven't read the book, can you give us an idea of what the answer is? Why people don't act? I know that's the
Yeah.
book, but can you give us an idea?
Yeah. Oh no. I mean, to be honest, there's three things, and I do talks about this all the time, and I ask people, which of these three, and everybody's like, oh yeah, it's whatever. So one, you don't really know what's going on. So you hear or say something, whatever, and you're like, is that just flirting, or is that like sexual
Mhm.
harassment? Is
Mhm.
that a funny joke, or is that racist? Is that person just like unconscious, like just drunk, or are they unconscious? So one
Mhm.
thing is that overwhelmingly we don't know what's going on. And Jesse Matthews, yeah, I talk about Kitty Genovese exactly in the book, chapter 4.
Mhm. Mhm.
One, we don't know what's going on. It's like ambiguous.
Right.
Two, we know what's going on. We know it's horrible, and this is actually the Kitty Genovese example. We're in a group of people. And so we're like, this is really bad, but you know what? You could do something, or you, or you, or you. It doesn't have to be me. So
Right.
the second is group setting and diffusion of responsibility and the Kitty Genovese bystander effect. Third thing is we worry about the consequences.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
I'm going to get fired if I, call out my boss,
Yep.
for what they did. I'm going to get ostracized by my fraternity brothers if I call 911. I'm not going to be, included in family gatherings if I call out my homophobic, great uncle, or, or whatever.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
so those are the three. We don't really know what's going on. It's ambiguous. We feel not responsible in a group. Or
Mhm.
we worry about the consequences. And in almost all cases, people can pinpoint it's one of those,
One of
sometimes
those.
two of
Yep.
those. Yeah, but that's why.
So, okay, now if we're putting this into the terms, if we're putting this into the terms of uh, the last year, of things that we've seen and all of that, um, how do you take how do people join in as individuals to take responsibility to become moral actors rather than, I mean, because realistically there are going to be consequences in some of these cases. Realistically there are going to be issues. someone else could have done it. So what's the answer?
Yeah, well, so wonderful question. So first of all, understanding the psychology that leads us to not step up is actually very helpful, because once you think, oh well, other people are not stepping up, that's actually helpful in and of itself, because we often feel, oh, it's just me, I'm the only one, whatever. And so first, understanding that other people may also feel exactly like you do
Hmm.
is in and of itself helpful in terms of empowering people to speak up.
Mm.
I describe in the book a student who is very good student, senior on the basketball team. And he was in my office one day a couple years ago, and he said, it's interesting. Every day in the locker room, someone says something offensive. And sometimes I speak up, but sometimes I don't.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what I wondered is, I bet everybody else in the locker room is also like, that's offensive. But each of them is kind of thinking, oh, nobody else, it's just me. So first, I think understanding that it's very normal to feel like this is really empowering. So that's first.
Yeah.
Second, I think we actually need to remember that many times if we don't speak up, it haunts us. Chris
Yep.
has just said, do what is right and not what is easy. And honestly, I love that. That could have been the title of the book. But because here's the
Right.
thing. Often when people don't step up, it haunts them. And so they think about it. When I've been doing, journalist interviews and podcasts or whatever, often, we'll go off the air right before we start, and the person will be like, hey, I just have to tell you something. And then they will describe something. And sometimes it's like 30 years ago, 40
Yep.
years ago, and they'll be like,
Yep.
oh my God, I still remember. And so I think it's really important to recognize that it can, not doing something does feel easy in the moment, but it often sticks with us and feels really bad.
Mm.
And then the other thing I think is that, frankly, for those of us in a power position, we have a responsibility to speak up because we don't have to worry about the consequences. So a few years ago, there was somebody in my office, a faculty member,
Mm.
who was blatantly stealing from the college,
Oh.
blatantly stealing. And my administrative assistant caught him, because she
Hmm.
does the books and the budget. And so she recognized
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
And she tried to report it, and he got very angry. And she does not have tenure, and she 100%
Right.
gotten fired. So she came to me, and I was like, well, I'll just go. It's hard to fire me. And I went and I took it up and I kept escalating it, and the situation got resolved. But I could do that because I was not going to face the consequences.
Yeah.
She could have.
Yeah.
But so I think part of it is that if you're in a situation where you're not in trouble, you're not at risk of, losing your job or, getting fired or something, you actually have a moral responsibility. And so sometimes that means that the person who notices it needs to find an ally, right? Needs to find somebody who can go to
Mm.
bat for them.
Mm.
And I think that's also important to recognize. So it's not a one size fits all solution, but we have
Right.
options.
I hadn't considered the last one that you mentioned about finding those allies. Just because I think most of us ID with being in this situation where we're on the same level as everyone else. So yeah, there's going to be a situation where we're going to get fired or we're going to be ostracized, what have you. That being said, what I don't know if many companies have this built in beyond, well, you can go to HR, but that doesn't feel like the same thing as having an advocate for you or something like that. So, do you know of programs, or is there a way to build this into, like, let's say, a company culture?
Yeah, there absolutely is. And I talk about some companies that have done this a little bit in chapter 8. But one of the best examples, and this is something that I actually feel super fortunate about, I have been asked to join a board, and I'm now a member of the board, and the board is called Active Bystandership in Law Enforcement. ABLE is the acronym, and it's run out of Georgetown University Law School. And
Hmm.
here's what this group does. They go into police departments across the country. They basically teach them about psychology.
Hmm.
And what they're doing is they're trying to get officers to stop bad behavior on the part of their colleagues.
Hmm.
And so to me, it's a brilliant program, because what it's doing is it's not saying to officers, be the whistleblower, be the snitch, or whatever.
Yep.
It's switching. What is being loyal in a police department? It's not overlooking fraudulent, dishonest,
Hmm. Hmm.
abusive behavior. It's stepping up and helping your colleagues do the right thing,
Hmm.
helping stop situations before they escalate. And honestly, To me, that's the kind of program that you need. You need to have a program in which we switch, that it's not you're the snitch, you're the, whatever, et cetera, that we change the culture. So the culture is one in which in which loyalty is about loyalty to the community, loyalty to the people, loyalty to your colleagues means loyalty, preventing them from getting themselves in trouble, right? Preventing themselves. I mean, honestly, I wrote an op-ed it was published in June in USA Today, and it was co-written with Cornell Brooks, who's the former president of the NAACP. And what Cornell and I describe is that in the case of George Floyd's death, if the officers with the man who kneeled on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes, if his colleagues, three were there, they had pulled him off, George Floyd is alive, and you and I don't know who he is. Right? We don't know who he is. It's nothing. It's nothing, because his colleagues step up and do the right thing. And so to me, that's the point of trying to change cultures. And now that's maybe an extreme workplace example. Many of us don't work in police departments or whatever, but that same kind of culture can work in all different kinds of places, even if it's not a life or death, situation.
I love that. Now, when you told me about the program, I thought this may actually have some legs to it, because specifically in law enforcement, because it is such a brotherhood and it is such a, a close knit sort of thing, and telling on someone it can get you ostracized. There's a lot of things that can happen from it. So I thought that was such a great example of things that we can do. So I want to shift the focus a little bit toward you, because one of the things that I think that it's easy for us to see is ourselves in the situations of how we feel about George Floyd, or how we feel about any of these cases. Honestly, any of these cases where we can step up and we can do something. What I want to do though is focus on what kind of person writes the book about these things. So obviously, for you, there has to be some sort of push or something that says, um, I was writing about positive psychology before. It feels lighter, and I mean, granted, it's a lot to it, but it feels lighter than um, some of the things that are life or death. What pushes you to write this book instead of another book about positive psychology, or anything else for that matter?
Yeah, I will say it was a very jarring shift.
Yeah.
And with the publication lag time, my book, The Positive Shift, had come out. I was doing press for it, and I was working on this other book, at the same time writing it. And so I was doing these interviews on happy and positive and whatever, and then I would go and read about Nazi Germany and civil rights movement and whatever, fraternity hazing deaths. And so the commonality for me, Kelly, in both of these books is I want to make a difference. So you're making a difference very practically in your coaching. You're actually, providing practical, personal, and professional success for people. I'm not a therapist. I am not a therapist. I'm not trained to be a therapist. And so to me, writing these books is my way of trying to give people tools that can make the world better. And so I wrote The Positive Shift, hoping it would help people live happier and healthier lives, which is good for all of us. I wrote Why We Act, hoping that it would spawn moral rebels, that it would help people speak up. Because here's the thing, if it was my son drunk, unconscious in a dorm room, I would really like a kid to stand up and call 911.
Yeah.
And, and so to me, I am hoping that it gives people tools and strategies they can use to step up. And that to me is the common feature.
Um, so, so I guess I wanna push a little bit on this, and really kind of get in a little bit. So, um, obviously, you have a conscience in there. You have this moral thing that impels you from the inside that says, "Go and do this thing." Where does that come from?
Well, Kelly, when you and I spoke a few weeks ago, I think we both had a big chuckle because I said, I can't even remember what question you asked me, but I remember at some point I said, maybe you know what I'm going to say now. And I said, I don't really care if people like me. And then you started laughing. You said, what did you say, Kelly?
I don't know, probably something along the lines of that is rare, because
And also
that
you,
is.
and also you though. And
Oh
it also
yeah,
describes you.
yeah. I'm pretty okay with that though. Yeah, yeah.
It- but here's the thing, like, I think there are lots of people that are really like, really? That
Mhm,
would be terrible. And so part of it for me is that, and I talk about this sort of, I'm trying to separate myself from the book now, but I talk about in chapter 9, who are these moral rebels? And so what do we know about moral rebels? What do we know about these people? Number one,
mhm,
they tend to be super high in empathy. So they're really able to put themselves in somebody else's shoes.
mhm, mhm,
Two, they don't really care about not being liked. So they're like, all right, people don't like me. Oh, well, there are a lot of other people, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Whereas for other people, that feels like painful and kind of awful. And then
mhm, mhm,
three, and this is the parent of a really argumentative 16-year-old daughter, this gives me a lot of hope. They tend to be good at arguing. So they tend to be people who are pretty good at arguing and kind of standing up for what they believe in.
mhm,
Um, I have a colleague who I've worked with for, probably about 20 years now. And at one point he sent me an email that was literally, I think, the nicest email that I've ever received. And he wasn't even meaning it to be nice, but he just
mhm,
said, what I think about you, Catherine, is that you always try to figure out what the right thing to do is, and then you try to do it.
mhm.
And I was like, yes, that is what I'm like. And it's like one of these things where whoever, I can't remember who wrote the comment, whoever it was should write it again. But that sometimes there are easier things, right? Sometimes it's just easier to kind of be like, I'm gonna look the
Oh
other
yeah.
I'm just gonna not really think about that or whatever. And yeah, thank you, Chris. Do what is right and not what is easy. And here's
Mhm.
the thing, I think lots of people try to figure out, it's easier often not to rock the boat, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
easier just to shut up. It's easier to look the other way. It's easier to be like, okay, well, it's not me, or it's not so bad, or it's not whatever. And the
Mhm.
issue is that if everyone does that, we live in a really crappy world,
Yep,
right? We
yep.
live in a really crappy world. And so to me, I am pretty much fine with not being liked. I'm gotten used to it. Yeah. And I'm really hoping that we can all live in a world in which more people do what is right, not what is easy.
Um,
And actually, I also think I'm going to go one step further than Chris. I think that if we live in a world in which more people do what is right, it will be also easier, right? It will be
yeah.
easy. It will become easier because if doing what's right is not like weird and
Yep,
abnormal, like the
yep.
whistleblower and the snitch and the tattletale, but like doing what's right is like, oh yeah, well, we all do what's right. Well, that's what we do in this police department or in this law firm or this, whatever church, whatever it is.
Mhm,
The life
mhm.
is going to be easier, right, for all of us.
Yeah, it's like you read my mind here because that is a great segue into what's next. What does it look like? And I'm going to ask you for the big portion of this as a world, as a society, how do you normalize that sort of behavior? Because obviously that's where the stopgap is. That's where the issue is. How do you normalize uh doing the harder thing?
Yeah. I've been giving a talk on this topic for probably about 18 months. Like before the
Mhm,
book came out, I was talking about this. And
mhm,
when I would talk to, big public audiences, here's the number one comment people would say at the end. This should be required for every student before they go to college, or this should
right.
be required for every high school student. And I actually had the opportunity last week. I did an event for a school in New Jersey, a virtual event, of course, but
Mhm,
and I did it one night for parents and teachers, and then I did it the next morning for high school students. And then I did it the next morning for middle school students, which did require kind of like shifting,
yeah,
some of the
yeah.
examples, and so on. But this is what I'm going to say. I honestly think that the more we can talk about it to teenagers, because if you can get these skills when you're 15 or 18
Mm-hmm.
or 12, it's going to stay with you, right? I mean, it's going to stay with you. It's not like, it's like, adopting any kind of a healthy habit, whether it's reading or exercising or, whatever. And so to me, if we can talk about these things with children, with teenagers, in high schools, it's going to pay off, because the moral rebels who stop, bad conduct on the school bus or in the
Mm-hmm.
locker room, they're going to be the people also who do the right thing in the fraternity house or, on
Mm-hmm.
their athletic team. They're going to be the right people who call out bad behavior in their office or their police department or their law firm or their PTA meeting or, whatever. And so to me, talking about it and changing the culture is what's really important. And, there's lots of evidence that cultural norms change. I don't know how old people are who are listening to this, but many of us grew up and like you never wore a helmet while bicycling.
Yes.
You bought a seat on an airplane that was in the smoking or non-smoking.
Yep.
Right? I mean, Emily is saying that. I remember thinking like, well, the safest place for a baby in the car is to
Oh,
hold the
yeah.
baby. Then you're keeping them, and like now that's like child abuse. I mean, that's
Yeah.
whatever. Those are examples of things that we can see culture changing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in all honesty, I end the book by talking about what I think is one of the most profound differences in terms of cultural change, and that is the legalization of gay marriage. That when I was in high school, the idea that, well, you could have a same-sex marriage, like that just seemed like impossible that would ever become legal. And now it's legal, and it's been legal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an example of the culture shift that we have
Mm-hmm.
experienced. And so to me, I think those are all examples of things that seem impossible and then become possible.
Now, let me ask you this, because one of the things that I think is interesting, Thurston brings this up. He says, if it holds and they don't change later. So, from your work, from your experience, what do you say to that?
So what I think is that it doesn't take everyone. It takes
Okay.
a tipping point. And so sometimes people say to me, and it's often phrased as I don't know if it's just convenient, but it's often phrased as like a great uncle. that's
Mm-hmm.
that's just
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm going to throw my great uncle under the bus, but it's often phrased that way. And people say, I mean, he says things that are offensive, but I know I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to
Mm-hmm.
change him. I know I'm not going to change him. He's really old, blah blah blah. But here's the thing: if your great uncle speaks up and you don't do anything, you don't say anything, even if you're not going to change him, you not speaking up and calling out that behavior also means
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you're not calling out that behavior for anyone else who's listening, your
Yeah.
children, your sister, your,
Yeah.
whoever it is. And so, yeah, everybody is not going to change. But if enough people have this shift, that will actually lead to a change in norms.
More other people. Yeah.
Exactly. And so then it becomes normal. So what do we know? So if you look at, for example, sexual misconduct in fraternities and athletic teams, which
Mm-hmm.
we've all
Mm-hmm.
heard about happening,
Yeah.
there are a tiny percentage of men who are engaging in the bad behavior. A tiny
Yeah.
percentage. It's not men in fraternities are all rapists or whatever. It's a tiny percentage. The problem is that percentage is like, everyone thinks what I'm doing is awesome. And
Right.
and many of the men around them are like, I think it's bad. I think it's bad, but I don't. And so that's an example, is that there are many cases in which lots of people think this is bad, but nobody says anything. And so part of the issue is that understanding that other people, in fact, think the same is really important. And that example, I didn't see who said it, but the
Yeah.
neurogenesis example, absolutely, absolutely. We know that we can change patterns of the brain, and again, it takes practice. But we can have a cultural shift in which things do change if
Mm-hmm.
we can get enough of the people to that tipping point.
That yeah, all of this is fascinating because I like the idea of kind of like we talked about with the positive psychology. I love the empowerment uh, point of view. I love the idea of believing that we can change, we can be better, because in all honesty, that's where all the hope is. So, uh, tell me what it looks like um, in a society where those are the norms. Tell me what it looks like in an average business or in an average school. What does that look like?
Yeah, I love that question. It's like, that's such a hopeful question, right? I mean, so it looks like an environment in which good behavior is the norm, in which people are respected, in which people feel empathy for each other. And I think there's also the assumption of goodwill. So
Mm,
one of the points that I make, repeatedly is that calling out bad behavior doesn't have to be saying, you're stupid, or
mhm,
you're sexist, or you're racist, or you're a bad person, or you're evil. It can be saying, you know, I am sure that you didn't intend to mean that to be offensive,
yeah.
or like I know that you were probably just being sarcastic, or I know that you were just kind of joking, but. And so part of it is that giving
Yeah.
people the tools to say, you don't mean, you don't know what you're saying and why that would be offensive. And
Mhm.
so, and part of it is then, owning it and saying, like, yeah, I used to actually make the same assumption. And then I learned, and so part of it is that giving people the tools that don't
Mhm.
require telling somebody else they're a lousy person or they're stupid or, a bad person is really important. That I think many of us just need tools to be able to say, and also to have the understanding that many people are experiencing the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I describe, one of my favorite studies in the book about being in a class in which the professor says, "Do you have any questions?" And you have a question. But when you go to raise your hand, you look around and no one else in the room is raising their hand. And so what do you think? You think, well, I don't want to ask the question because it just must be me, and
That's right. The one that feel like the dummy.
I don't want to feel like the dummy. I
That's
don't want
right.
to. But here's what's fascinating. You're not raising your hand because you don't want to feel like the dummy. You look around at everybody else and you're not thinking they don't want to be the dummy. You're thinking what?
Everybody else is smarter than I am.
Everybody else is
They
smart.
all get it. Yeah.
And here's the thing, when you tell students that, they all laugh because they're like, oh, yeah, that's right. And so here's the thing, we all look the same, not raising our hands, but we assume that our behavior is being driven by something different from other people's behavior.
That's right.
So having that sort of understanding, that actually has lots of impact beyond the classroom. So you're sitting in the locker room and somebody says something offensive, it might be that everyone thinks that. I remember times in which I've spoken up in a meeting and I've said something, and afterwards, a bunch of people have come up and been like, "I'm so glad you said that. I was thinking the same thing." But they didn't want to speak up. And so again,
Yeah. Yeah.
understanding the sort of normal human reaction to want to fit in, to want to be part of the group,
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
In and of itself, that's a really important understanding.
What I think is really good about this is I love you giving us uh sort of some tips and some ways to kind of approach it. And honestly, I would love to see a society like that. I think what I'm going to have to do is now to start a campaign to get you like on a tour, or at least a virtual tour of, of all of these middle schools. They kind of get that started. Um, so okay, before we're coming up against the hour, before we hop off, I do want to make sure that people know one where to reach you, because I did see something on your site. Sounds like you were doing book clubs and uh, oh wait, are you still doing that one?
Yeah, yeah. The good thing about the pandemic is I never leave my house and I never put on pants. So, there we go. Uh,
Yeah, this is a great world. This is a great world. So let me pop this up here. Alrighty. So
oh, yeah.
you
Yeah.
guys, you can see Catherine's books. They are on this site. They are in the comments, and actually, I'm gonna throw that back in the comments just to make sure that everyone can see it. And because there are also cases where you're doing virtual speaking engagement, things like that. Um, you can actually reach Dr. Sanderson right through the form on this site. So, Catherine, uh, before we hop off, I want to get your closing thoughts, your closing ideas. Um, tell our guest, I mean, tell our audience anything else maybe they should know about you, about where you're going, about anything that you feel like would even be helpful.
Well, first of all, Callie, I have to say thank you so much for this invitation to talk. It was
Yeah,
clear when you and
definitely.
I connected a month ago that we could talk for a couple hours,
Yep. Yep.
just ourselves. And we are like, oh wait, we should kind of wait until like there are
Yeah.
other people listen too, right?
Right.
Anyway, so thank you for reaching out. And I'm sorry to be such an idiot sitting around in Microsoft waiting for you to let me into the meeting because that was what was on my Google Calendar. So anyway, I
Nope.
must
Super happy that, that you're there.
I must have accepted it as like a guest, waiting. I wonder who the guest is. Anyway, but but what I want to say is that, to me, the whole point of my writing and my talking and my teaching,
Mm-hmm.
try to give people tools they can use, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
This is my way of trying to give people tools they can use. And if anyone has a question for me that you didn't have a chance to answer, it's completely fine to reach out to me. There's a form, as Kelly just put up on the website. You can reach out to me, and certainly I think talking about this with our friends, neighbors, family members, children, etc., talking about the psychology underlying inaction helps give people an understanding into the very normal experience that we all have of seeing something. When I do one of my talks, which you can also see a version of on my website, for free. You can watch that. But I do something in the first 5 minutes or so, and this is what I do. It's like a poll, a Zoom poll, and I say, who here has ever seen or heard something problematic and failed to speak up? And I get, and this is with lawyers, this is with high school students, this is with teachers, this is with community members. 80 to 95% of people say yes.
Wow.
80 to 95% of people say yes. And so the reality is we all are hearing and seeing things all the time that are problematic, and being aware of why we don't speak up and developing strategies for speaking up can help the world be better for all of us.
You're right. I think we could just talk for a couple of hours doing this. Um, I don't want to hold you longer though, because we'd have to do a second hour of the show. Um, so you guys, obviously, Dr. Sanderson has some beautiful concepts and ideas, and obviously reach out to her if you have questions, like she mentioned. Uh, Catherine, if you can hold on for 1 second, I'm going to talk to you backstage. I'm just going to play us out with my cheesy intro. I'm sorry, my cheesy outro. And just hold on for one moment.
And thank you, Kelly, for this opportunity to talk. I so appreciate
Yes.
it. It was so great to spend more time with you.
You know what? Let me just say this really quickly. When I started off this live show, it was about maybe 8 months ago. The first person who I wanted to interview was you. And I was like, oh, Lord, no, Catherine's going to totally like diss me and say, no, never, you small fry. And, you're one of the first people I connected with on LinkedIn. And you've been so active and so willing to participate in these things. It is just a beautiful thing. So, nope, thank you.
This is the blessing of the pandemic, is it not, Kelly?
That's right. Yeah.
Right? We got more time to chat and more time on LinkedIn. I don't think I ever posted on LinkedIn before the pandemic. Now, I'm like, what am I doing? I don't go anywhere,
That's
so
right.
yeah.
That's right.
So, yeah, there we go. Silver linings of a global pandemic.
Right. That next book, you got it right there. Uh, Here, hold on for just a second. To all of my audience, you guys are great. I love you so much. You guys are definitely moral rebels, and you stood up today. Thank you. And I'll see you guys next time. Oh, wait, there I am.
Ta-da!